Live.
We are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon. So, while everybody is gathering, well, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to let you pick up your cup of tea or coffee, get comfortable, make sure technically you could hear us and you could see us. And just so you also know all your comments. And so, if you could put thumbs up in the comments to let us know that you could see and hear us and all of that quality is going well. I will have my team monitoring the chat so they can let me know if there's any questions or anything that's coming up. So feel free to post things in the chat. As we go, we will definitely come back to them as we answer some questions. We will come back to your comments or questions that you might have. So this is great. We can actually see. I can actually see the chat. Um,
Hi,
in
Vera.
yeah. Hi, Vera. Lovely to see you. I'm also very excited. Thanks for joining us. So I wanted to introduce each of us. My name is Tatiana Senikovic, and I am an executive and leadership coach. I come from a background of HR. I've been an HR director at Esalen Institute for 12 years before becoming a coach. And my mission is transforming the organizations through transforming the leaders of those organizations to become more conscious and joy filled. The joy part is really big for me. And so there's different ways I approach that mission. One of them, while we're all here. Other parts I wanted to mention is I do a weekly newsletter or an article on Tuesdays for LinkedIn that lots of you are reading, which is terrific. And I've done at least probably about 50 of those so far. And then there's a newsletter that I started this year with my team. That topic of it's called "How's it working for you?" That's a question for all of us, whether we're leading or not, in terms of whether something is working for us, great. But if it's not working, what are we doing about it? And there's some insights and practical tools in all of those for you as leaders, for yourselves and your growth, and also for how to lead your teams. And so, lives is another reason why we gather here today, and to get that mission going, but also get to talk and hang out with my favorite people, the great colleagues that I met along the way. I made new friends. And so today I am really thrilled to welcome Jared Dickinson. Thank you so much for joining.
Hmm.
Jared is a CEO and a founder of JD Communication Strategies. And in the past, he started his career in consulting with an HR focused. And the last 8 years, communication is the biggest focus as communication coach, been working in that realm. And one of the biggest programs with his company is the art of productive conflict. So the topic for all of us today is the art of having difficult conversations. And so Jared and I are here today to kind of talk about it, hear your questions, and support you along the way. If something is coming up right now, or you've been stuck on something, please feel free to post it, and we will answer it. But we will begin. Jared, anything else you want to add to your realm of expertise?
No, I think you said it very well, and I'm just very excited and grateful for the opportunity and the invitation to have this conversation with you.
That's a delight. I'm definitely looking forward to it. So let's start with at least the first question that you and I would like us to discuss is why are so many of us are so averse to having difficult conversations from your
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, right. Whew. Even the conversation, even the words itself kind of spark
Totally.
something, right? Yeah. And I mean, there's some truth in it where it's challenging, right? It's uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
that feels immediate. And I also will say that what is uncomfortable or challenging for one person might not be for another. And so I think the context matters on what's happening.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know about you, but I think of two things when I think of the challenge of conversations and why we're averse to having them. One is based on, I think of like personality styles, and that we all have
Mhm.
our experiences in our life, right? People in our lives, role models or not, that have shaped how we show up, right? And intuitively what that feels like. So I'll speak for myself, where challenged. I grew up in a household where conflict was avoided at all costs. And if conflict was happening, it was under the rug, it was behind closed doors, it was a no place to
Correct.
discuss. And so I have this, that was what was normal for me.
Mhm.
And through some time of recognizing like that didn't feel normal, that didn't feel of like what is, which conflict is part of it, and it's normal, and it can actually be a great
Mhm.
opportunity.
Absolutely.
So I think of that first thing comes up for me about how we associate and how we have a response or reaction to conflict, and what goes into our own stories of that.
Yeah, absolutely. As you brought up when I thought about this question, actually, the part of like how we all grow up came up for me as well, and how it was modeled. That's exactly what you were speaking to.
Mhm.
Is what's the norm, what's not the norm, and then how do we navigate it? How does it serve us in life in different phases and aspects of our life? And there's personal, there's professional. I think for me, as I spoke to whether my clients or actually overall in HR, or watching myself over the years as I was trying to change the very similar pattern from the family, it's that the conflict was avoided,
Mm.
or just wasn't healthy. Conflict was never modeled, and I completely agree with you in terms of the conflict is generative and it's an opportunity, which it was always, because the parents did the best they could with the tools that they had, and that wasn't the modeling that I had also growing up. So when I'm speaking to now adults and working with adults all the time, I think there's a big fear of losing that relationship, whatever that relationship is. That people, their version of having a difficult conversation is the fear of that loss of that relationship in whatever aspect it is. Personal relationships are definitely super difficult, right? And so professional as well is that whether it's having difficult conversation with the boss, where there's certain consequences that could happen, right? Overall, or a
Mm.
peer or your own team member, right? So if you're managing a team and a person, back to personalities, their personality a bit, and you know that this conversation might not go as smoothly as you would like it to be. And so we're just humans, do not want to tackle
Mm.
into the uncomfortable. It's really, really uncomfortable. I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yet being averse to it creates such a snowball effect,
Mhm.
for everybody involved. So I think that to
Yeah.
me, like, goes the part there, how we were raised, right? And what was modeled for us. But
Mm.
also, do we pay attention to um, what we might lose? Like, are we trying to avoid the
Yeah.
possible loss of the relationship?
Yeah. And as I hear you speak, it makes me think about mindset, right? Of like how we've
Mhm.
shifted a mindset. There's a quote by a South African leader by the name of Malidoma Some, who I really resonated when I first heard it. And he says that conflict is an invitation for the relationship to grow deeper. So conflict is an
Beautiful.
invitation for the relationship to grow deeper. And I really think, as you're talking about that, I think the mindset is, how do we look at this as not as, what are we going to step on to that's going to explode, and how can we look at it as a way for deeper connection, deeper understanding, a opportunity to grow closer and be more effective with the people we're working with, or to be closer to our partner or our family member. When we can look at it that way, I think it changes not only the language that comes out, it
Yeah.
changes how you approach it, and might be able to kind of minimize that like negative bias that can obviously creep in, like you said, and go to worst case scenarios, right?
Correct.
That's I think what probably gets a lot of people. It's like, if I do this, this could destroy my relationship. They might perceive me in a negative way. All those things could happen.
No, you highlight it so beautifully, because I was talking literally, I mentioned to you before we got on the live, is I literally had a client with a difficult conversation, just like a stalemate, and where it
Mm,
snowballed. And the part is that he and I were talking. I said, there's always to anything, any decision we're making, whether we're avoiding the conversation or having it, what's the prize? Just what you're saying, that
mm,
your relationship will go deeper. And that was the biggest thing for him. The drive is a better, deeper, more trusted connection with
mm,
his co-founder, right?
mm,
Versus then what's the prize and the consequence, right, of having a conversation or not having a conversation. So that
mm.
to me is you added a beautiful piece, is that we do it because those relationships matter.
Right.
You're very
That's right.
correct, because like
Yeah.
otherwise there's no motivation for us to have, like, we would just continue avoiding them.
That's right. That's right.
Unless we're literally forced by whoever, and it's like, no, you are having a conversation, which is the worst case scenario. Because I think Dasha made just a comment. It's like, I think that the
Mm,
value of conflict hides in the resolution and repair, and in
mm,
how it's handled. All of those pieces absolutely matter. And I think we had some
mm,
questions later they wanted to address, like what's, in terms of the resolution part, but
mm.
I don't want
I
to
love
leave it.
that. The
Yeah.
resolution and repair. I love that. I think about that too, of like the part of some of the counseling psychology that comes out of that is like the rupture and repair. I love that. It's not
Mhm.
about the rupture, it's about the repair. That's the
Mhm.
most important piece. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's great.
absolutely. Next question for us is, how can we become, so as we're talking about this aversion, with
Yeah.
aversion comes all kinds of feelings and emotions as we try to dance around it, successfully or unsuccessfully. And so it comes absolutely with the level of anxiety, uh,
Mm,
whether it's to be before, during, after, but a lot of times it's very much before and during. And
yeah.
so, from your perspective, how can we become more comfortable with that feeling of anxiety before having a difficult conversation? And then that's one part. And then during having a difficult conversation, from your experience and point of view.
I'll I'll mention one, and then I'd love to also hear from you, Tatiana, because I know this is something that's
Yeah.
near to your clients as well. Is one of the things, and I don't know if actually Peter Myers is joining us. I saw that he was going to be here. Peter
Mhm.
Myers is in the communication world, and actually one thing I heard from him, who I know is also connected to Esalen, is something that stuck with me many years back that I heard is, when we get anxious and we go into these conversations, we go into very much like self mode, and we're worried
Mhm.
about how we're going to be perceived, and we become very self conscious, or is this the right thing to do or not? And one of the most powerful things that I think has helped in what Peter highlights is this aspect of get out of your own self-consciousness and focus on the listener, focus on the person that you're speaking to. You're
Yeah.
doing this most likely for a really great reason, that you want to create more understanding, you get on the same page, be more efficient or effective with each other's time, be closer. And so if you can think about the benefit to the other person, and really how this can also support them, I think there's a big benefit in getting out of our own self-consciousness and stepping into what the benefit of the other is, that shifts that nervousness, that shifts that anxiety just a little bit.
No, this is super helpful. And I think as we work with people in terms of communication, I think the one of the parts that I always highlight, whether it's a difficult conversation or not, is to come with a sense of active listening. You're there to
Mm,
listen, to understand, right? As opposed to just like, and when with difficult conversations, people already come with a certain level of energy. There's definitely energy, from both sides, of certain discomfort or charge or all of those mixed together.
yeah.
So the part is the reminder that I always put in, and for myself as well, is that just like what you're saying, I am not there to get my point across or like
Mm,
to deliver it. Yes, I can share my side. However, I am there just as much, if not more, to listen to the other person. And listening to the other person, to your point, is that I gotta drop my stuff
mm,
completely and me and be really present with the person to listen to them, to understand, and
mm,
not be ready to be like, yeah, but I have a list of my things that I was gonna share. So I'm just
mm.
gonna, that reaction to be like, I am doing this to respond.
Isn't that so hard? That is so hard though. In those moments, I like, talking about it here, and I'm sure people think about
Yeah.
that, right? It's like when we talk about it, oh yeah, like listen, that's a good one. Like, we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. We should listen more. It's like it's probably a good standard
Yeah.
idea to practice in day-to-day life. And when you get in those moments where it feels personal and it feels like, dang, it just it's so challenging.
And
I'm yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean the personal, and then exactly, and then it becomes constricted, and it just becomes a part of less of a conversation and more of
Mm,
like, what's the thing that I want to get across. And the other part, I was thinking of the anxiety, at least somatically, like in terms of the body, during the difficult conversation. Just like you're saying, once everybody gets into the conversation and it becomes, however, sometimes, the power of wills is
mm.
that to slow down. I don't like, sometimes there's some conversations that I knew were difficult or were going to be difficult. I put a note for myself, like literally on the desk. And thank
Mm,
God I speak two languages. So if I'm speaking to an English speaker, I can put it in Russian. And if I speak to the Russian speaker, I can put it in English. So the other
mm,
person doesn't know what I'm doing, but I'm literally putting for myself is slow down. I've done that. And so
mm,
because when I'm anxious, or when I just want things to go faster, right? And so unconsciously, my speech will speed up, my internal energy and just kind of overall how I feel will speed up, or I just
mm.
wanted to finish, you know what I mean, faster. So to
Yeah.
be like, slow down and take a breath,
Mm,
and like pause. That's another piece. I don't think people pause enough in conversations.
I
Um,
like that. It's like pause. Let's just take a pause. And I feel like we should call out a reminder that please feel free if any questions are coming up or
yeah,
ideas that we post
absolutely.
out there. Would love to hear it. Thank you for, I see some stuff coming through.
Oh, this is so perfect, Dom. Exactly. It's like most people approach difficult conversation as a drag. I love that drag and drop. How are my, here's my issues. Okay, bye. Exactly. It's just like, here you go. I'm finally got my strength, and like, I'm going to tell you, what's
Mm,
been, whatever, penting up in me. And, and I'm just going to drop it and run because it's so
mm,
uncomfortable. But it's like, this is not helpful. It's back to Dasha's comment of, then we have to repair the
mm.
difficult conversation. You know what I mean? Then we have
Yeah.
to watch that part. Yeah.
I love what you're saying. And I think it's important piece around this slowing down, this aspect of pausing.
Yeah.
Because I think it goes back to what we were discussing before around we all have our different reactions to these situation, our different I'm calling them reactions very intentionally. They're not responses, they're reactions, right? They're programmed into us.
The triggers. Yeah.
And the way that you discuss of like taking a pause, stopping for a moment, feeling our feet on the floor,
Hmm.
taking a deep breath, or literally calling a timeout and saying, "Hey, I'm really this is probably not a good time either for someone that's in the conversation, whether it's a group or an individual or
Yeah.
ourselves, where we need to call a timeout." And I know there is some privilege in being able to do that, and knowing
Mm.
oneself and how we react to those is important. But I think the more we can slow down, the more we can take a time out for 5 minutes, walk away, and come back, it can be more fruitful and helpful for the conversation. So I think that's a big one.
I think, thank you, Jared. I think for me, as well as you're speaking, is that we all process information differently. And we
Mm,
all deal with, you're saying, the reactions. I a lot of times call them triggers, right? Because you're triggered and you just kind of like, it's like a knee jerk reaction that's caused. we're all there's all neurodiversity in all of us of how we
Mm,
process information. And so for somebody who can quickly think on the spot, forget
yeah.
the fight or flight response of a difficult conversation that can be that creates for the nervous system. It's
Mm,
just that we process things at different speeds. And so just as you mentioned earlier, is coming into the conversation to understand and really hear the other person, is always keeping that in mind and be like, not people don't think and process things the way and the speed that I do. And
mm,
with the same with, speaking. If I speed up, some people be like, this is too fast, just overall, even, without the
right.
difficult conversation. Yeah.
The energy. Yeah. And it looks like someone, Dasha had asked, and I'd love to ask this maybe question to you, Tatiana, is would she's asking, would you say that having such a conversation on a walk or some type of movement is helpful instead of sitting in an office restricted in movement? I know a lot
So
of your work is
so
holistic.
I could say it could work. Let me think through this. Sometimes it's very supportive of
Hmm,
a conversation if both parties feel comfortable. So I've done that
hmm,
where I asked a person, which kind of knowing like, yeah, can we have a conversation about this, and is it okay with you to walk, during that
hmm,
conversation?
hmm,
And the person, what we're checking for is actually psychological safety. Because a lot of times, we're moving, that's great, but there are people, if you're in a space, particularly at work, and there are people around you while you're moving, you're constantly watching who might hear or not hear what you really genuinely want to share.
yeah,
So you might tamper, it's not always in your 100%, but you might tamper your responses or just be monitoring too many things. So it's a great suggestion if that works for you. And then the next part is to be okay with the other person not being okay with walking. Because they just need, because me coming from HR and doing
hmm,
quite a bit of different, with investigations, that to me always comes up, the confidentiality of any kind of a conversation. And so
hmm,
for me, in my experience, it's more that the other person asked me to go on a walk, to be quite honest, and I could gauge what kind of a conversation we're having versus me initiating it as an HR director. But
hmm,
it's a great, yes, movement for some people is a way. I've had people get up in my office as we would be speaking, and they said, "I need to move," and I said, "You're
hmm,
free to move." And so they would get up, and as we're talking, they're kind of moving, which I am comfortable with.
hmm.
Might not be for everybody, but I understand that again, people process information differently.
Yeah.
And
And I love
so
it
for
because it gets us out of our head, right? It gets us out of where we are here. And usually those are the more can be some kind of negative bias there and gets us into our bodies, which I think is right. It gets stress
as
out of
you
our
said, you could
body
feel the
and
feet on the ground a lot more if you're
yeah,
if you're standing or doing something.
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. So let's see what else we got. Should we, that's actually flows really well as we're going through this conversation piece. We did the aversion, we did
Mm,
the anxiety, and kind of how to work with it, and hopefully you guys are getting some pointers that's really helpful for you. So the next one is, should we expect a resolution to
mm.
come out of a difficult conversation, and
Ooh,
what would be considered a win for the two people in this situation?
ooh, I really like that question.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. And I'm trying to think of why I really like that question is because I think it goes to what you were saying before about like we have this idea of that we have to get a certain outcome out of this, or I think what was said earlier about it's like a drag and drop kind
Yeah.
of position of like we need to this and there might be some opportunities where a quick kind of conversation
Mhm.
where we need to get something figured out
Yeah.
quickly and move forward and execute. And okay, there's those situations, but as you said, sometimes it's not the right timing. Sometimes there is an opportunity to say that, hey, someone's not really ready to communicate, right? And not
Yes.
ready for that. So I think
Yes.
that's also an important piece.
I think for me, and I think that was mentioned also in comments by Dasha at the beginning, is that part of like the resolution and repair. It's like, yes, from human nature, we come into conversation going, okay, I want to resolve it and I want to be done. And it's
Mm,
literally was my conversation with my client at the beginning of this week when he was like, I just want to have this conversation. And I said, you guys haven't had it for 10 years and you want to get it done in the one conversation. I would like it to be open-minded that this is a conversation. You
mm,
literally coming in into conversation. And so for me, this is a great question is, what are the expectations and
mm,
intentions that each party comes into a conversation, especially a difficult one,
mm,
right? And so it's like, if I'm coming in to get an answer, that's a different intention than I'm coming in to understand what I'm missing, or also to share my frustration, right? Or to
mm.
share how it impacted me as much.
Yeah.
And so that's the part. And so what's a win for me, for two people in this is that actually, A, that they got together and they had a conversation, and B, if there's no resolution at the moment, that they're actually open and continuing to have this conversation.
Right. Yeah.
That's a win for
Yeah.
me, as
Yeah.
opposed to like, well, we're not done. It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
lots of things are not done in the first try.
Yeah, I love that. The understanding, the more connectedness, the start of a conversation for something to move forward. And I think, yeah, when we come in with that like quick mindset of fixing something, I think the other thing that the speed, we move too quickly, and I think we
Yes.
miss what the most important, right? Like usually what comes in at the surface of
Yes.
what the issue maybe
Got
is
it.
actually not really where the root of the issue is. So you
Right.
also, by going in with this kind of transactional, let's get this done mindset, I think oftentimes what I see in my experience is that we're missing what the deeper kind of issue is that is really going to get us the result that we're looking for, right? And it might take a
Yeah.
little bit of time, like you said, you can't fix anything
Yeah.
with one necessarily. It's one conversation at a time, but it's not one conversation.
And as you're speaking, exactly like and Dasha was mentioning, to add to your like, why are we coming into this conversation? She's like, sometimes feeling heard and seen, even if there is no perfect solution, is a big step forward.
Mm,
That is a human overall. Our desires is to be heard and seen.
yeah.
It might look different to each of us, right? However, as Jared, as you were saying, how we come in into conversation to have a conversation, and back to how we're speaking into, it's making the relationship work, right? What's my long-term intention and goal? Is that actually to have a good relationship with this person,
Mm,
work, personal, whatever that is. So if it's a long-term goal, it takes some runway, like it
yeah.
takes some time. And our society, I am totally guilty of it as well, is like, can we just get it faster? Like
Right.
overall, right?
Yeah.
I was like, patience used to definitely not be my strong
Yes. Yeah.
quality. Now I think it's like with time and definitely time, and then
Yeah.
experiences as a parent as well. It's like, you either gotta become patient or is it gonna be really difficult? So
And I think
um
you're bringing up something that we've discussed before in the past around this. What are the kind of common missteps that people make? And I think what you're saying is by starting with an intention, I think is
mhm,
a good way to start a
yeah,
conversation. Because what I often see, and we get to see quite a few of challenging, difficult conversations, is where it starts out with good in they want to have good intentions of saying like, hey, let's get down to it, this is what needs to change, and it ends up setting up the conversation for more defensiveness,
mhm,
more discourse, more just falling into our negative patterns. But I think as you're talking about is, I think one of the most important things we can do, and there's many different strategies and there's many different, you know,
yes,
models out there of like what challenging conversations and what you can use and crucial conversations and counseling psychology and nonviolent communication, all these other different pieces. And I think an intention of like, what is the goal of the conversation to the other person particularly, is such a great way to ground the conversation in moving forward.
Mhm.
Of, this, it's a counterbalance. This in communication, that would be a skillful use of counterbalancing. It's
Yeah.
not about the BS sandwich, which people often say, okay, well, that sounds like you're just giving some nice stuff and then you're going to land with the hard stuff. And I don't actually believe in that. I believe if you set a true intention of how this is going to benefit the audience, the people that you're talking to, or the person that you're speaking to,
Yeah.
and maybe even throw in an appreciation that's sincere and that is authentic. I
Yes.
think that's a good starting place then to be able to balance that with what isn't working yet and how can we kind of move forward from that. So I think that setting with an intention, maybe even an appreciation to start the conversation, is something that people often miss. And I would say, including myself, in many times I fall victim to my own learning in that process when it's challenging.
You highlighted something, the intention, and it being explicit about the intention, because
Mm,
just like you were starting this, is a lot of people say, well, that's what I thought I wanted, or I like, yeah, of course I want that. But it's like,
mm,
unless you literally consciously, I don't know, before the call, before the call or the meeting or the conversation, 5 minutes or something, you like literally go, what is my intention? Like, what is
mm,
my intention? And
right.
also, what I was talking to the client, I said, it's lovely to say it because it's your intention.
Mm,
For the other person to literally just hear what's your intention. You're not projecting anything. You're sharing your experience and your little intention,
mm,
but it calms everybody down because
mm,
you are being explicit into, because
yeah,
generally the intention, just like what you're saying,
yeah,
is positive focused, right? Or
yeah,
it's
yeah,
growth and forward focused. So
yeah,
then everybody goes, oh, he's not here to like literally win this conversation or change my mind
mm,
or just prove me wrong. They literally hear what you're saying for the moment, go, okay, let's go with that. That makes a big difference. And
yeah,
appreciation that you brought up is, yes, a lot of times people roll their eyes around the sandwich analogy, or I love how you said the skillful use of counterbalancing. We're coming to these conversations because we value this relationship. So there's something about this person that
mm,
matters to us,
yeah,
right? So just like you said, if one genuinely and sincerely says something that they value about this person, otherwise you wouldn't be in the room with this person.
right.
To So there's always something to be found, and the genuine part is the key, because people can so feel they can so read and feel the fake. And
Yeah,
Dom mentioned, I think, as you and I are speaking, more of like the steps how to start a difficult conversation is that establishing trust,
right.
which these are all of the aspects of it.
Yeah, agreed.
Is there any other, like, as somebody, like, we were talking about this beginning of a conversation piece, and Dom mentioned the establishing trust. What one, could you name one tool or one approach that you've used in your work in establishing trust in difficult conversations?
I think it's a lot of the things that we have discussed before. I think one of the biggest skills that you mentioned before was listening, right?
Mm,
Like the ability to listen is
mhm.
huge. And by that, just immediate diffuses situations. And it's not easy, right? Especially, it's not easy in general
Yeah,
conversations, not alone when there's challenge or deep-seated relationships involved in that. And then I think the aspect of not slowing down, right? Like
yeah,
not owning that this isn't going well and we need to call a timeout and pause and like what can we do differently, I think is a big one. And I think also on the counter side of that, where people can get into just talking and actually not get down to what the actual concern is. So
yeah.
you don't really counterbalance because all you're really doing is talking about this thing
Talking.
that's out there and
Talking.
not actually
Yeah,
clear. It also is clarity of what you were talking about, because if you're not really clear on what the issue is and you're approaching someone about that issue and you're not clear on it, how are
Not
they
helpful.
supposed to understand what
It's
is needed or what you're asking of that as well? So I think
it's so
there's
not
some
helpful. Yes,
clarity practice that's also like, okay, what is the concern? And you need to make sure you state it in a timely manner. Don't spend 4 minutes giving me background and then tell me there's a concern, right? Like,
I was gonna say, make it succinct, like make it really, because people also, you guys, in difficult conversations for me, because our nervous system is already engaged,
mm,
it's kind of like the first thing somebody says that's really triggering. It's like everything else they're not going to hear. So be mindful, kind of how you say it, and the longer you talk, you definitely lost them.
yeah,
So are you trying to get your point across? I
mm,
want to be mindful, talking about time. I want to be
yeah,
mindful of time. So thank you for those of you who are watching us. If you have one last pressing question or comment, put it in the comments. I'm going to ask Jared one last question, and then that would allow us to wrap up in the next probably 5 minutes.
cool.
So the last one is that has come up actually after I left my HR role, is that we know it takes two to have a conversation.
Mm.
What do we do if the other person doesn't want to engage? That definitely comes up with, when we do coaching, we're like, well, the other person doesn't want to talk. So
Mhm.
how do you go about it?
So the question is, if someone doesn't want to engage, what do we do about that potentially?
Exactly.
Or we sense that they don't want to engage. Yeah,
Yes.
well, I mean, there's that point of, yeah, you're right. Maybe it is, maybe it's not the right timing. Maybe they don't have the capacity, or they sense that, I'll say my own experience, that my partner will say, I don't think you have the capacity to have this conversation right now. And be like, oh yeah, I think you're right. Thank you. Um, but just knowing that both our own capacity and their capacity.
Yeah.
But the truth is, if they're still, and this is definitely, I've seen this, I've experienced this in my own life, of that, hey, we're not having this conversation, then that turns into the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm noticing that, this is really important to me, and I think this is something that can help us to get closer and build more trust and be more effective. And I'm noticing that we're not able to discuss this in further. And I'm really curious
Exactly.
what's happening for you. Like,
Yeah.
when I bring this up, what comes up for you? And getting curious about that to understand where you then can go from there, because at this point you're not getting to whatever you want to talk about. It's something
Exactly.
that's even standing in the
Yeah.
way for you to even have that conversation. So that's where you got to start in a way.
No, I complete you. Yes, absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. Is that then you have to try to engage to why the person is not engaging,
Mm,
until the point, and it's back to how meaningful is this relationship to you, and what are you trying to build going forward. Personal relationships, work relationships, there are some that it has come up where two people like, we don't want to talk, and in my HR career I was like, you don't, like, you will be talking, so
mm,
let's we're going to have a facilitated conversation now, we're going to have a third party involved,
mm,
because you two have to work together of how you're going to go forward to work together, right? And
mm,
so that's the part. And a lot of times in those circumstances, it all went back to they didn't have the modeling of how to, have difficult conversations.
yeah,
And so that was their modeling. They just did it at any cost, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so I loved how you brought up your partner. I love her already, but it's like I know her already, but this is perfect. Is knowing you
Yeah.
well to be like,
Mm,
I don't think this is a good time to have that conversation for
mm,
your capacity.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
so having that trust, so it's back to trust, to be like,
Mm,
yes, we will have the conversation, just not right now.
mm,
Or setting a different time. It's like, well, that goes back to teenagers. Like a lot of times Maxine would be like, I don't want to have this conversation. So then I go, when would you like to have this conversation? Because we're having it. So
yeah.
you have a space and time to decide when, within a framework, of course, not forever and
Mm,
ever. but giving that space to the person to say tomorrow or in 2 days or in an hour, it gives people breathing space and kind of breathing room to go, oh, I have an option. Because a lot of times it feel like there's no option. And it's
Yes.
like, no, there's an option. The option is when we're having the conversation, not when we're having it. So
I'm so glad you brought that in. I think that's such a key point of, yeah, there's some pressure in there. And so giving some space
yeah.
can be so critical. Yeah.
Dawn made a comment. Good point, Jared. Know the obstacles firstly before continuing with the conversation. It may all stem from those obstacles, not the topic at hand.
Yeah, it feels like it's what we were saying before is like, it's so true that it might not be what you're coming in might be a very superficial, not the most important. Let me say that differently. That might not be really what the topic is at hand. Like Dom said, yeah, it's
Yeah.
just that could be more important. But maybe first we have to get through this before we can kind of dive in a level deeper to get to some more fruitful, kind of deeper conversations.
I think we have one last question. Do we have time for that? Let's do a couple of minutes.
Sure.
From Dasha, do you have any suggestions on how to move from emotional fragility to resilience when it comes to having challenging conversations?
Do you want to take a stab at this first, or do you want me
Sure,
to?
I can. I think for me, what comes up is resilience is our ability. For me, is our ability to deal with kind of what comes, kind of bounce back. Is our ability to bounce back. So when it comes to emotional sensitivity or fragility, the way Dasha used, but it comes to that, I think space and boundaries. What comes up for me, literally in the moment, is that if you know of yourself to be more sensitive emotionally and having difficult conversations, there might be whether a time frame set for a conversation, in a sense of like, can we spend 10 minutes? Because that's back to the capacity, right? That just mentioned. It's like, I only have capacity to hold this for 10 or 15 minutes. And then can we have more of smaller conversations, I would say, in this? Because the resilience part, it's like, to me, it's like a muscle. It doesn't just show up. It gets developed from trying and then learning and then trying some more and learning, right? And so not trying to have them doesn't build resilience. I hope it makes sense.
That makes total sense. And
Okay.
what I heard there was two things that are, I think, absolutely critical is the boundaries piece, right? Of really understanding what is going to help not only you, but then you might also understand the other
Yeah.
person. And I think that is such a key component of that. And I think the other pieces around practice is critical, right? Like we can use hope as a strategy, right? Which we all do
Yeah.
in certain ways, right? Like, oh, I'm just gonna like ignore this and hope that they figure out that
Yeah.
they're not being very skillful by doing this or whatever. Maybe have no idea what's happening. And so I think also the practice of actually having the conversations, it doesn't mean that you're gonna just like go in and it's gonna be easy, but at least you feel more confident that and I would say in my own experience, out of, I don't know, 10 difficult conversations that I have to have, I feel like 9 of them end up I'm walking away and I'm feeling more confident in myself. I'm
Right.
feeling more confident in our relationship as you talked about, understanding, more connection, that there was a study that was done that they interviewed people before going into a challenging conversation, right? Thousands of people, and they all thought that this was going to be a challenging conversation. And then afterwards, they asked them, "Was that a challenging conversation?" And it actually more than half of them came back and said, "No, that wasn't actually a challenging conversation." So it goes into that whole mindset of like,
Yeah.
how can we look at this differently and prepare ourselves? And you got to do the reps, like we can
Yeah.
sit in here and have a LinkedIn live all day, but at the end of the
Yep.
day, we have to have those conversations. We got to get feedback. We got to keep an open mind in that. So, yeah.
I think you wrapped it up beautifully, because my parting words were kind of like, what will we say? A couple of things for people to walk away with
Mm.
is to get more into the art of having difficult conversation and that confidence of having them. And what I just heard you say is actually having them, having more of them, and then the feedback part as well, right? Because there's a conversation, the feedback. Anything else? One more thing that you want people to remember?
Mm. Hmm. Be kind to yourself. Be
There
kind
you
to
go.
yourself. It's a tough, yeah, it's the most,
Yeah.
I mean, in communication, it's the most difficult form of communication. And I'm partly speaking to myself in this regard. Just being kind with yourself in the process of taking your time. Doesn't have to happen right away. Understand that you're giving a gift as well to yourself and to others by taking that step, by being the courageous leader that you are. And so
Yeah.
just giving yourself some space there.
That's lovely. Vivi made a comment. So Jared, great job, Jared and Tatiana, always searching for ways to improve communication in the workplace, my personal relationships, and when
Mm,
Layla and Ryder approach those teenage years. Those are
right.
Maxim's cousins, by the way. So go
Aw,
be. Thank you.
I love
With
it.
spending time together. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think for me as well, to add a couple for you, and we talked about them, is that set an intention for the conversation. Remember, you're having this conversation because you treasure this relationship.
Mm,
You want it to do well, and then listen. Go and listen to understand the other person,
mm.
as opposed to respond, right
Yeah.
away
Yeah.
or react. So, thank you, Jared. It's been delightful and super fun.
That has been fun. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for Don Road. Keep up the good fight. Look at us. We're totally fantastic presentation exchange. Jared and Tatiana, thank you so much for
Thanks, y'all.
participating. All of you, this is super helpful. I will see you soon. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.